Wonderful. So I wonder how good you are at waiting. Before I moved to Sheffield, I used to work in Scotland for a Christian charity, and it would require me to travel back and forth between Stirling and Glasgow and Edinburgh and other parts of Scotland as well. And I had timed it so well that I could run down from the house to the train in about 6 minutes, and therefore I could leave the house in 7 minutes and make it to the train before it was leave. And Catherine would often ask, "Why do you leave it so tight to catch the train?" You might ask the same question. My response would be this: because I don't like waiting. Waiting is a waste of time. Of course, that was dependent on the train actually being on time. Having run down to the train to find it delayed would be very frustrating. I'm not very good at waiting. I wonder how good you are. I wonder if you have ever waited for something for such a long time. Maybe it's a parcel, a job, some news, or something else. And at the end of your waiting, when the thing finally came, it turned out to be very different from what you expected. Maybe you were surprised, maybe disappointed, that it didn't seem to live up to all you had hoped. It's been 55 years, 27,570 minutes of playing time, 300 different players, over 140,000 miles of travel, playing in 52 countries on 4 continents since England's men's football team were last in the final of a major competition. It's been a long wait, but I wonder how you will be feeling tonight at about 10 p.m. Well, we might be in the midst of penalties by then, but I wonder if the wait will be worth it. At this point, I was going to put on an England shirt, but I forgot it, which is really frustrating. I won't ask Malcolm to take his off. It's all right. We might wish that waiting for something as trivial as a bus or a train or a parcel or the takeaway or a football match was our only experience of waiting at the moment. But the reality is that many of us are waiting for things much more profound and significant. We're waiting for the vaccination to be rolled out. We're waiting for case numbers to decrease significantly. We're waiting until we might feel comfortable actually meeting in person with other people. We're waiting to see family and friends who we haven't been able to see much or at all over the past year. Maybe we're waiting for test results, an operation, or postponed medical treatment. Some of us have or are waiting on God. Maybe we're waiting on Him to act, to answer a prayer, or to fulfill a dream. And perhaps you've even experienced disappointment with God if those things haven't come or lived up to your expectations. And so James says to the believers he's writing to, "Be patient then, sisters and brothers, until the Lord's coming." And then James paints this picture of a farmer waiting for his valuable crops to mature, patiently waiting for the autumn and spring rains. The farmer has prepared the ground. He has sown the seed, but now he has to wait, and he's powerless to control the rains. Nothing he can do will make the rains come sooner. The only thing he can do is wait. So too, James says, must we be patient and stand firm because the Lord's coming is near. So let's focus on that phrase for a few moments. The NIV translation, maybe you can see this on Zoom or here in church. The NIV translation that we use here at St. Gabriel's translates verse 8 as, "Be patient and stand firm." But the original Greek is more nuanced, and I'm not going to attempt to read that Greek. Peter Smithers, if he was with us, could probably give it a good effort. But taking each word in turn, it can be translated as I put at the bottom there, "Be patient, also you, strengthen the hearts of you." So the NIV says, stand firm. But I love this phrase, which is more accurate to the Greek. Strengthen the hearts of you. Strengthen your hearts. Now, the word strengthen was used to describe something being established, a buttress, a prop, and it would conjure the image of something being supported as a plant is supported as it grows. The ESV, English Standard Version, translates it as, you also be patient, establish your hearts. So let your imagination take hold of that image for a moment. Your heart being strengthened and established, growing and maturing, strong and firm, because it's being supported. It's a heart that doesn't bend when the hard winds blow or wither when the soil becomes dry and cracked. It is strengthened. It is established. So why? Well, James says, because the Lord's coming is near. Again, let's take a closer look at this phrase, the Lord's coming is near. James uses the same Greek words that Jesus used throughout the Gospels to describe the coming of his kingdom, which was at hand or has come near. So in the Gospels, we get the sense of Jesus' kingdom coming in the now and the not yet. Through Jesus, we see signs of the kingdom. It is near. The deaf hear, the blind see, the lame walk, the dead are raised to life, prisoners set free, the bondage of sin is broken. The kingdom is near. And so James says, we are to be patient to establish our hearts because Jesus' kingdom is closer than we think. He is at work. His kingdom, his rule, and his reign. His sphere of influence is closer than we can imagine. And so that's why we cry out in prayer, your kingdom come, your will be done. Come, Lord Jesus, come. Now, last Saturday evening, England played. Sorry, this is only my second England football reference, don't worry. They played in the quarterfinals of Euro 2020. While I had watched every other match of this tournament, I was unable to watch this one. The fact that they won 4-0, I'm still getting over it. But over a month ago, we had put in the diary a date to have some friends over for dinner we'd been meaning to see them for some time. We didn't want to cancel, and so, yes, I had to sacrifice watching the match to spend time with these friends. Now, don't worry, it wasn't too much of a sacrifice. They are very lovely people. In the moments when I popped out to check that the children were asleep, or to clear the dinner plate, or to make teas or coffees, which, don't worry, I didn't do that often, I would quickly check the score. It was a comfortable match for England, as we know, and therefore it wasn't an anxious evening. Our friends left later that evening, and I watched the second half highlights. Now, knowing the score, and particularly because we had won, made watching it really enjoyable. I wasn't worried or anxious. I wasn't fearful about the outcome because I already knew what was going to happen. James is saying the same thing here. Be patient, stand firm, establish your hearts because you know that the end is coming and you are already beginning to see it outworked. It is a picture painted amazingly by John in Revelation, when we get a glimpse of the new creation, where God will dwell with his people, where there will be no more death, or mourning, or crying, or pain, for the old order of things has passed away. We must set our hearts on that vision of the future, and as we do so, our hearts will be established and strengthened. When you are waiting for something, knowing what you're waiting for changes how you wait. We wait, and as we do so, we establish and strengthen our hearts. We're able to do this because we know what we're waiting for, and in fact, are starting to see glimpses of it in the here and now. The important thing then is about our attitude of readiness, or our active waiting. As Jesus says in Luke 12, "Be dressed, ready for service. Keep your lamps burning, like servants waiting for their master to return from their wedding banquet, so that when he comes and knocks, they can immediately open the door for him. It will be good for those servants whose master finds them watching when he comes." So how good are you at watching? Do you have a heavenly perspective or focus on life, with spiritual eyes that are open for glimpses of the kingdom, fixing your gaze on God's kingdom? It always puts everything else in perspective and in its proper place. Often the things that we're worried or fearful about seem to weigh less when we fix our eyes on the kingdom. And for me, that is at the very heartbeat of prayer. Moreover, James suggests in verse 11, there is blessing for those who wait actively, who are patient and persevere. And it's a blessing that comes now. It's the blessing of peace and security that comes when we put more faith and trust in Jesus. And then James goes on to suggest that patience is warranted precisely because God has shown himself to be faithful. How easy is it for us to forget or remember how God has been faithful in the past in our lives, let alone in the lives of those heroes of faith. James points the believers to those heroes, those prophets who spoke in the name of the Lord. See what the Lord did through them, James says. See how he outworked his compassion and mercy. So too, we must look to the heroes of faith, yes, in the Bible, but also throughout history, and maybe significantly, those heroes of faith in our own lives. I love to hear stories of marriages that have stood the test of time, marriages with anniversaries of 50, 60, 70 years. When I look at those marriages, it gives me encouragement that maybe, with lots of God's grace, my marriage to Catherine will go the distance. I love this church. Albeit relatively small, it's all age. We are young and old, 1 to 90. Those of us who are a bit younger, I won't speak for anyone, have so much to learn from those who are older. Those who have been patient and stood firm in their faith over many, many years. And we need to hear their stories and learn from their wisdom and be led by them. They are vital to the life and the health of this church. God has shown us the seeds of his kingdom. We've seen glimpses of the new life that came with Jesus and hope for the restoration of all of God's creation. Jesus is the author and perfecter of our faith, and we ultimately look to him. He offers us a relationship with him here, now, today. And his presence is closer and nearer than we think. We must pursue his presence to flood and infuse every aspect of our lives. As James says, as the farmer is patient, so must we be. Right now, some, if not most of our seeds are still in the ground. We don't see the fullness of the crop until Jesus returns. And so God calls us to be faithful farmers, imitating Jesus wherever we find ourselves. You know, when you are spending lots of time with someone, when you are saying and doing the things that they do and say. So too, when we spend lots of time with Jesus, we start doing and saying what he does and says. We become his hands and feet, using our gifts, caring for the sick, reaching out for the lonely, tending God's planet, proclaiming the good news. And as we do all of this, we trust in that glorious day when the fullness of the harvest will come and our disappointment will be no more. We trust, we are patient, we stand firm, strengthening our hearts because we know the end of the story. And so let me close with these famous words from the final pages of The Last Battle, the final Narnia book written by C.S. Lewis. And you might want to, if it's helpful, just close your eyes as I read these words. And as he, Aslan, spoke, he no longer looked to them like a lion. But the things that had begun to happen after that were so great and beautiful that I cannot write them. And for us, this is the end of all the stories. But we can most truly say that they all lived happily ever after. But for them, it was only the beginning of the real story. All their life in this world and all their adventures in Narnia had only been the cover and the title page. Now, at last, they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story, which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before. Be patient, stand firm, strengthen your hearts, because the Lord's coming is near. Amen.